It's round 12 of the candidates, and it's arguably now or never for Ding Liren, who's got the white pieces chasing Jan Nepomniachtchi. If you haven't yet seen this game, you don't want to miss it. So he kicks off with d4. We had knight f6 from Radjabov, pawn c4, e6, and after knight c3, we're going into a mainline Nimzo-Indian here. And now e3 played, castles from Radja, bishop to d3, and after d5 here, we go down this trendy system. So knight f3 is the actual main line here, but the white players have been taking on d5 a lot recently. The pawn recaptures, now a3 kicks the bishop back, and then this queen comes to c2. And just to show you the general ideas, white's looking to plant the knight here, then go pawn f3, maybe e4 later or g4. There's quite a lot of attacking ideas here for white. But Radja comes up with a really interesting move here. Now the black players have tried all sorts of things. Pawn c6, rook e8. I think Mamedyarov went a6 here, then he went c5. But Radja goes knight to a6, and he's preparing this pawn c5 move. Then he wants to recapture with the knight, and it's just a very difficult concept to refute. I mean, if you capture that one, which we do see Ding doing later on, well then after pawn recaptures, although you've damaged the structure, if you go say pawn b4 to clamp on c5, then you can have this one, you start undermining the pawns using that double pawn, plus the bishop can come here. Already black's doing quite well. And if instead of capturing the knight, you go pawn b4 immediately to stop c5, well then black can actually go c6. And after say knight f3, knight c7, you can actually move that knight out of the way and start preparing pawn a5, undermining the queen side. So it's just a very nice opening concept, and it seemed to slightly throw Ding here, who took some time. So he developed his knight to e2, Radja played pawn c5, and now Ding decides to capture that knight. Again, it's not so easy here. If you just castle the king, for example, well then pawn c4 can come. You'd have to exchange bishops like this, and after the knight drops back, covering this one, well b5 could be coming, pawn a5, getting the queenside majority going. White's still not there yet with the kingside counterplay, central counterplay. So a really nice opening system here basically. And that's why Ding decided in this position here not to castle, not to take on c5, bring the knight into the game, but take that one on a6, the pawn recaptures, and now take on c5 here, forcing the bishop to recapture. Pawn b4 kicks it, bishop d6, bishop b2. So Ding's hoping that these structural weaknesses here will offset the bishop pair, and he just wants to imbalance this game because he's pushing for a win, of course. So we now had a5 from Radja, excellent move, looking to undermine those pawns, opening up this bishop here as well potentially. Now b5 from Ding, looks very natural. And now Radja uses the second pawn here to start ripping open lines on the queen side for his bishops, and it's already very tricky for Ding here. I mean, if you castle, for example, well then queen to c7 can come, you hit this pawn. Now if you go say pawn to h3, well black can take here, winning a pawn, because if you recapture like this, you lose your queen on c2. So that's why Ding actually plays pawn h3 in this position here. He doesn't castle, he doesn't resolve this tension yet. Radja develops with bishop to d7, threatening to win a pawn. And the best move here would seem to be pawn a4, but again Ding kind of wants to imbalance things. So he takes on a6, the rook recaptures, he just gains a bit of time there, and then he brings the rook to the d file, pressuring this weakened pawn. But now excellent play from Radjabov. He just ignores that pawn. He goes rook to b6 here. And Radja's basically saying to Ding, go ahead and win this pawn. I'll take back with my knight. Rook takes, and your king's not yet castled. You're opening the board for my bishops, and my rook's already pressuring your bishop down here. So one sample line could be queen to b8. You pressure this one. Say if the rook dropped back and defended, rook c8 hits the queen, knight c3 blocks, but these bishops just really come to life on this diagonal. This is just one sample line here, and black's already about -4, 4.5. It's just very, very good. You're going to win material eventually. There's just too much pressure there. So that's why Ding didn't actually take this pawn on d5. he recognised the danger here, and so he played rook to d2 instead, overprotecting his bishop, but the computer's just not loving the position here, as we can see, because now great move from Radja, queen to c8, looks down this file here, and also pressures this pawn. So now if you castle the king, we can actually crash through on h3, pawn recaptures, queen takes, you're threatening mate, supported by the bishop, and say you go f4 to block that one, well now here comes the cavalry, again we're threatening mate, and if you move the knight to block now and protect that, well we take on e3, we hit queen, we hit rook, say the queen drops back to carry on holding the bishop here from this rook, well now you're actually getting mated with bishop takes on f4. If you were to recapture, well now this bishop cleared the 6th rank for the rook, so this kind of variation could continue, you give up the rooks, this is mate. Just to give you a flavour of the danger in the position here. So you simply can't let black crash through on pawn h3 there, in this position here. So that's why Ding didn't castle after queen c8, he went pawn f3 instead, but just such an ugly move. Look at these dark squares, Swiss cheese around the king. So Radja goes rook e8, targeting this pawn. Ding defends with the king, very, very ugly. And now Radja goes queen to b8. So he lines up this battery on the dark squares here. The knight could be coming to h5. He also pressures down the b file. Really nice geometry from the queen. And now Ding plays an inaccurate move. His best was bishop to c1 here, but none of it's very easy to play. He goes queen to c1 here, but this sets up a beautiful tactic for Radja. Do you want to pause and find it here? So Radja plays in this position, rook takes on e3. Excellent move. You're luring out this king if the rook is captured, which it wasn't, because now you check on the dark squares here. So if the king comes to d3, for example, well then we go with bishop f5, the king's getting cut to shreds by the bishops. If instead you block with the knight, which is the best move, well now the queen joins the attack. The king could come here, but then again this bishop is a big problem. If it comes back here, well now we pick up this piece, the king goes away, and now this knight can join the party, for example. Again, these dark squares are just a big problem. So that's why Ding didn't actually take this rook after it took on e3 here. The attack's just too big. So instead he played knight to d1, kicking it out of the house. The rook retreated here. Now the knight came to e3, and rook b3 from Radja. Another great move, invading in the position here. There's this threat to take the knight. Still you can't take on d5, or after captures, then you lose the bishop on b2 here. So instead this knight hops into g4, and now simple stuff from Radja. He captures here with the bishop, the pawn recaptures, he goes rook c8 to hit this queen, it came away to a1, and now bishop f4 was just the final move of the game. Ding actually resigned here, because if the rook moves anywhere up or down the board, well then you lose your bishop on b2. If you come to c2, well you can't do that, you lose a whole rook. So you would have to take this one, the queen recaptures, and then there's just too many problems for the king here. Now this rook's actually attacked still, so you don't have time to say take on f6, or then the queen takes here with check. And if instead you move your rook away, let's say rook to e2, well now we can take here, checking the king, using the fact that this pawn is pinned, and after the king goes somewhere, let's say to f1, well here black has the attack and 2 pawns up, and the game is just dead. Here's actually one nice line of how the game could have finished. You can take this pawn even, pawn recaptures, take here with check, king goes away, and you pick up in the corner. You know, it's just absolutely devastating. So Ding fails to win. He's now no longer really in the hunt for first. Jan just needs to draw from one of his last 2 games. This is the standings on screen here, and we've got a fight for second place going on now, especially between Nakamura and Ding, because if indeed Magnus doesn't play in the next World Championship match, well then second place could be the person who's playing against Jan Nepomniachtchi for the World Championship, assuming Jan wins the tournament. So thanks very much for watching. I'll be back later with another recap, and I'll see you all soon.